This is intended to be a somewhat comedic breakdown of a film and is not intended to be a replacement for watching the film. Please go watch the full film in its entirety on the appropriate streaming service or media. Any criticism is not intended as an attack of the people who worked on the film or anyone who enjoys the film. Thank you. Welcome back to Hell's Drive-In. After a little Christmas break, I'm back, and I'm actually back with an interesting film. This is David Cronenberg's Videodrome. A cult classic. I'd heard of it ages ago, never got around to watching it until the end of last year. That was actually the final film that I watched in 2025, and it was a pretty good film to end the year on. Right, I enjoyed it. I did. I really enjoyed it, but there's a lot to unpack. This was my second ever Cronenberg film. The first one was The Fly, and this was definitely it was an experience. Before I jump into things, let me clarify something. Everything that I'm going to say about the visuals and the writing, it's my interpretation. I'm not saying this as fact. It's fine if you disagree. I am not speaking on behalf of David Cronenberg or anybody involved with this film. This is just what I got from watching this. As I said, my interpretation. But on that kind of warning, kind of note, let's jump into the visuals. Right, so as I said, this is a Cronenberg, so you already know there's some insane visuals to go over. Most of them are practical, so let's start with something, I don't know, small. This fucking stomach vagina. It's a fucking stomach vagina. Oh my god. Don't get me wrong, this effect is incredibly cool, and it's so well made, but it sends something through me every time someone forces their hand inside. Please be gentle. It's best shown off in this scene. He's pressed against a door because he is kind of actually at an angle, part through the door. Everything below, like halfway through his chest, is not real. That's not him. That's all prosthetic. And then his actual body starts about halfway through the chest, and then they've blended it so well. That's what caught me off guard with this effect when I first watched it. Is just how good the blend is. There's a slight coloration change. It gets a little pinkish halfway through his chest. But other than that, this is one of the best examples of this kind of effect I've ever seen. Anyway, my favorite effect in this film is actually these nasty little gnarly tapes, the pulsating, the slimy skin. God, it's so gross and I love it. They had to use Betamax tapes because they couldn't use VHS tapes because they were just too big to be able to easily fit into the vaginal hole prosthetic. And honestly, I had so much fun with this film visually. Looking at the concept art, the designs for everything, it's all so cool. I mean, look at the design for the gun. It's a fucking masterpiece. Chef's kiss. Honestly, this film, it just makes everything fleshy and gross, but it works. And it works so well. The body horror, the living TV, the living tapes, the screws in his arms. It's so cool. I mean, the TV stretching, then turning to skin. I love these effects so much. I will come back to talk about this a little bit later when I talk about the writing, but the way this was actually done is really cool. So they used an air compressor connected to a keyboard so they could control it to create kind of an inflating, pulsating effect that makes it look like the TV is breathing a bit. To get the stretch as the screen comes out, they use something called dental dam, which is it's like a sheet of latex that dentists use. And then they rear projected the static onto it for what ends up being one of my favorite effects I've ever seen. It's so creative, it works really well. It's just, oh my god, I could sit in awe of the effects in this film for actual days. But anyway, they are a highlight of this film for me. But now that I've covered the effects, we get to move on to the big beast that is the writing. Oh boy. So this is where I need to clarify again that this is all my interpretation of this film. This is not confirmed to be the intention behind this film. I do not know what Cronenberg was intending with some of this, but this is what I got. So let's do a quick rundown of the plot before I break it apart. Max, a TV executive and president of a TV channel known for sharing like provocative and violent content, comes across a new show called Videodrome. He's fascinated. The show is filled with torture and murder, and he's impressed with how realistic it seems. He starts experiencing kind of hallucinations of the show ever since he first watched the tape. After kind of obsessing over it, he broadcasts the show. His girlfriend, played by Debbie Harry, auditions to be on the show, then goes missing. Max tracks down people connected to the show and finds out that the reason the torture and murder looked so realistic is because it's real. He's then manipulated and is forced to kill people that pose a threat or risk to Videodrome, and after gaining some freedom, he hunts down the people responsible and kills them. He has one final hallucination that leads to him killing himself. So, to me, there's some really interesting messaging in this film. The most obvious being an anti-capitalist statement on corporate greed in the media and a message against corporations having control over the media that we consume. But the more interesting one is the commentary on pornography and the porn industry as a whole. So, it's pretty well known that the porn industry has many problems. The major one being the violence women have experienced and still experience while working in that industry, and the violence women have and still experience as a result of that industry due to the men that watch it. It conveys this in a couple of interesting ways. The more obvious way being the use of practical effects and the kind of person that Max is. Max is a dick. He harasses women. I mean, within like 2 minutes of being at his workplace, he touches the ass of a woman who works for him. Within this film, he represents the average straight man with power. The way he treats women it's treated as normal, which at the time it was, and a lot of the time still is. This male behavior is still treated as the norm, which is why it's still frighteningly relevant today. A world where "but what was she wearing" is still used to defend the actions of predatory men. A world where people use social media AI to create sexual images of women without their consent. Messages like this are very important and have a vital place in autistic expression. As I said, Max is an embodiment of a stereotypical man, and before the events of the film, he's gone through his life as a pretty standard sexist businessman. But his life takes a turn into what you could maybe call punishment. His script is flipped. He goes from a man with power to a victim. I believe that a lot of men subconsciously see themselves as invulnerable to sexual assault because, to put it bluntly, they are the penetrator, not the penetrated. On a small side note, I also think that's why so many of these predatory and predatory adjacent men tend to be homophobic, because deep down they fear that a man will treat them the same way they treat women. Anyway, that subconscious awareness of penetration is what sustains a lot of men's belief in their safety and invulnerability to sexual assault. And this film does what those men fear. It takes away that protection. It does it in a very literal way. Gives the man, a main character, a vaginal hole in his stomach. I mentioned that he is manipulated and controlled by the powers of Videodrome, but what's important is how that's depicted. He isn't manipulated by simple threats or blackmail. He's forcefully penetrated by a man with more power and authority than him, and once he is left behind after being violated, he has no one to turn to, no one he can truly trust. The one person that he thought was his friend turned on him. Now, in the context of the film, his so-called friend was always working against him, but even this small plot point has so much relevancy within the commentary, because something that unfortunately a lot of women can relate to is the experience of being a victim of sexual assault and seeing those closest to you turn their back on you. The people you once trusted blaming you for something that was not your fault, blaming you for the pain and suffering inflicted by another person. I think the scene of him realizing that the last person he can trust has abandoned him is one of the more distressing moments in his story. I mean, you could even take it further and look at the fact that Max is a person in power, and Harlan, the man he thought was his friend, was secretly hoping for his eventual downfall and suffering. Now, this is, again, unfortunately, another thing that's reflected in the real world. Many women, especially women when they have power or a position of authority, are constantly under fire from men wishing for their downfall. And quite often, men will pray for the downfall of women that they know personally. It's like an extension of their insecurity when a woman has more power than them. Max has power. His friend Harlan has less power. As soon as Harlan is in a position to take advantage of Max, he does. I'm trying to avoid repeating myself too much, but that's also reflected in real life because, as much as it saddens me to say, there are so many men that would take advantage of women, even those closest to them, if they knew they could get away with it. I also think it's interesting that the person that raised his awareness to the problems surrounding Videodrome is a woman. Bianca is the one that told him that there's something wrong. Sure, he noticed things that were a bit off, but only once he got involved. Only once the dangers were involving him. When he was safe, he didn't care. He was happy to broadcast Videodrome. Happy to keep working in the porn industry. Happy to keep working at his TV studio. But as soon as he gets involved, as soon as there's a risk to his safety, that's when he starts to listen. And as pretty much every woman is aware, that's also reflected in the real world. Women are aware of this stuff. Women are aware of the risks of sexual assault and rape. They are aware of the dangers. And they are the people that you should listen to. But unfortunately, they are the people that don't get listened to, especially by men. They are the people trying to tell you about these horrible things, and men like Max are the exact people that ignore it and pretend it's not happening, all until it's something that's actually a danger to them. They don't care if they're safe. Anyway, as I said before, women suffer due to the porn industry, the corporations behind it. Sex work is not fundamentally bad. The problems come from corporate involvement, which usually, and by usually I mean always, involves a man. That corporate involvement leads to many women who have worked and still work in that industry being controlled and manipulated by men. And a lot of men struggle to understand and see that. So this film turns it around and shows you a man suffering because of exploitation content. And yes, I'm aware that the examples in this film are extreme. The content he's consuming being torture and snuff films, and the pain that he's experiencing, it's almost supernatural. But it's a relatively effective allegory, almost in the hopes that seeing a man suffer because of that content might make it easier for certain men to understand. You'd hope that they'd have the awareness and media literacy to understand suffering is bad, irrelevant of whether or not they can relate to it themselves as a person, but nevertheless, it works. But despite all this being pretty good commentary, the film does have its flaws. Mainly the women in the film. There are 5 named women in the film, and I think that the way this film uses its female characters is where it's at its weakest. I would say that it's almost a victim of the problem it's making commentary on, but realistically, it's a victim of cinema in the 80s. The women are far less developed than the men, and even the ones that get more screen time have the majority of their plotlines center on sexual themes and men. Take Masha. She works in softcore porn, but even when discussing something that she implies is important, the conversation is still forced into sex. Nikki. Her scenes all revolve around something sexual. The other women in the film fall short with their little screen time and little use as nothing more than an object to push the plot for the man. As a result, this film has quite a few sexist overtones, which, as I've kind of touched on, if you take the commentary on pornography into account, the sexist overtones arguably add to it. But a problem with that is, in a world with an ever-growing problem with people having a lack of media literacy, those overtones and themes could be very easily misinterpreted. With some changes to how the women are used in this film, I feel like its messaging could have maybe been done more effectively. I'm aware that this film's plot centers on sex, but the men manage to get dialogue and purpose that is more than sex. Their purpose is more dynamic. The same cannot be said about the women. Something I find really interesting about Max's story, though, is how it ends. After being violated and having his life ruined, he gets revenge in the hopes to end his suffering. But it doesn't. He's still hallucinating. He's still going to die. He got revenge, but it didn't save him. Faced with a final hallucination, he kills himself. No happy ending, no life after his pain. The reason I find that interesting is this is a fate shared by stories about women who are victims of sexual assault. Many films fail to show that there can be life after suffering. Once the character has been violated or assaulted or raped, that consumes their entire existence as a person, making their character and their development center around the actions of predatory men. This film reflects that, as Max's life was over the second he crossed paths with Videodrome. I also find it ironic that a film with this kind of messaging has James Woods in it. Because, let's be honest, that homophobic, paedophile, genocide-supporting, Trump-loving dickweed wouldn't understand this film's messaging if a really cool queer guy on YouTube explained it all in a well-made, very helpful video essay. Another thing funny about James Woods in this is he was apparently quoted as saying, "I'm not an actor anymore, I'm just the bearer of the slit." This was in reference to the difficulty and struggle that he had wearing the prosthetic of a vagina on his stomach throughout the day of filming. He's in Videodrome and saying something like that, but still has the worldview of a sexist old man. How can you be that unaware? The final main thing I want to talk about is something I mentioned earlier. This shot here. I just want to note that with everything else considered, this gun stretching through the TV becomes very penile, very phallic, and that's what shoots him. The penile shape shooting him. I don't think there's much to really explain with how that connects to the rest of what I've talked about. I know I'd regret it if I didn't mention it. Now, I know some people will disagree with most of what I've just said in this video, and I know what group of people will mainly disagree. But as I said, this is just my interpretation. If this video somehow finds its way to that corner of the internet, I can predict the kind of response it will get, but I don't care. Anyway, that's pretty much it for the writing. There's some small details that I didn't mention, but it's time to move on. So, as usual, let's start with the budget, which in this case, it's a relatively small one. This film was made on just under $6 million, which today is like $18 million. And based on how good these practical effects were, that is actually a surprisingly low budget. Rick Baker, you fucking magician, you've done it again. You've blown my mind again. This was yet another sci-fi film that's production is tied into Star Wars a little. This film was one of two films pitched by Cronenberg after he turned down the opportunity of directing Return of the Jedi, which ended up actually releasing the same year as Videodrome, but Star Wars Return of the Jedi had a $32 million budget. I'm not saying there's anything bad with the effects in Star Wars Return of the Jedi. I love that film. But this being just $6 million, it really does put it in perspective just how good and how creative these effects really are. They actually filmed 3 different endings for this film. There was the ending that they used where Max kills himself, and an ending that had an epilogue showing Max, Nikki, and Bianca on Videodrome, all with their own chest slits. There was also a third ending with an orgy between Max, Nikki, and Bianca. I'm kind of glad that we got the ending we did because I think it works best with the rest of the film. Anyway, as I said, I cannot confirm that any of this was part of Cronenberg's original intention. This is all just my interpretation. The only intention I can confirm Cronenberg had was the commentary on corporations controlling the media. But that's pretty much it. So, to sum up, listen to women and fuck James Woods.
Long live the new flag.